Hi guys, just imagine you are standing in the center of a medieval village at 3 in the morning. There is no hum of a refrigerator, no glow from a street lamp, and no distant roar of an engine. The world is so quiet you can hear the frost forming on the thatch above your head. You've been awake for an hour, sitting in the velvet darkness, waiting for your second sleep. This is the time nobody talks about. The secret gap in the night that once belonged to every human on Earth, before we let the modern world steal our silence. Tonight, you aren't just a guest in history, you are living it. You will breathe the scent of crushed lavender and wood smoke. You will hear the rhythmic lowing of cattle through a thin timber wall. You will walk the geometry of the soul, navigating a world where every bird, every stone, and every shadow had a name and a story to tell. We've been told the Middle Ages were a time of grey mud and simple steel. We were told wrong. It was a world of vibrant colour, of strange animal trials, of medicinal gardens that grew right at your feet, and of a peace so deep it felt like it was carved from the very stone of the cathedrals. Before we journey into the unseen corners of the 14th century, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, if you could bring back one thing from the ancient world to help you sleep tonight, what would it be? I read every one of your stories. Now, let the weight of the 21st century dissolve. Let the rising and setting of the sun become your only clock. And let the immersive hidden details of medieval life guide you into the deepest rest you've ever known. This is what life was actually like in the Middle Ages, that nobody ever talks about. History is often taught as a series of dates and battles, but the true history of humanity is written in the small things. The way we slept, the way we ate, the things we feared in the dark, and the things we hoped for in the light. Tonight, we aren't just learning history, we are remembering it. We are reconnecting with a version of ourselves that lived closer to the earth, closer to the stars, and closer to the strange, beautiful mysteries of existence. So, let the fire burn low. Let the shadows stretch across the room. We are going back to a time that nobody talks about, a time of unseen wonders, hidden depth, and a vibrant, breathing reality that has been waiting for centuries to be rediscovered. As the final embers of the hearth fire pulse with a soft, dying rhythm, you find yourself drifting into what the medieval mind called the first sleep. In our modern world, we treat sleep as a single, heavy block of unconsciousness, a task to be completed. But for you living in the heart of the 14th century, sleep is a two-act play, a graceful dance between the waking world and the realm of dreams. Around midnight, the transition happens. Your eyes open naturally, not to the jarring screech of an alarm, but to the profound, velvet silence of a world without electricity. This is the watch, the staying up, or the first waking. It is a period of quiet wakefulness that lasts perhaps an hour or two, and it is arguably the most peaceful time of your entire life. Just imagine the stillness of a village at 2 in the morning, when the nearest artificial light is miles away. The air in your room is cool, smelling faintly of the lavender you tucked under your straw mattress, and the lingering scent of wood smoke from the evening's pottage. In this space between sleeps, your brain is flooded with prolactin, a hormone that induces a state of meditative calm. You aren't groggy. You are hyper-aware, your mind clear and expansive. This is the time nobody talks about, the secret hours where the most intimate moments of medieval life occurred. In the cottage next door, a mother uses this time to nurse her infant in the soft glow of a rushlight. Down the lane, a scholar hunches over a manuscript, the scratch of his quill, their only sound in the darkness. For many, this is the premier time for prayer and contemplation. Can you imagine the intensity of a prayer whispered in a world that believes the veil between heaven and earth is thinnest in the deep of night? You feel as though your thoughts are rising directly through the thatch of your roof, drifting up toward the stars that hang like lanterns in the sky. It is a time for digesting the day's events, for talking softly with your partner about your hopes for the harvest, or for simply staring into the darkness and feeling the sheer, overwhelming presence of your own existence. As you sit up in bed, wrapping a heavy wool cloak around your shoulders to ward off the midnight chill, you realize that the night is not just an absence of light. It is a physical space with its own textures. In the modern world, we have killed the night with streetlights and screens, but for you, the night is a sovereign territory. It has its own sounds. The rhythmic chewing of the livestock in the byre attached to your house, the distant haunting cry of an owl, and the unsettling creak of the timber frame as it settles in the cold. Because you cannot see clearly, your other senses sharpen to a razor's edge. You feel the grain of the wooden floorboards beneath your bare feet, each knot and splinter telling a story of the tree it once was. You smell the change in the weather before it arrives, the air turning damp and metallic as a mist rolls in from the river. This is the unseen reality of the Middle Ages, a life lived in a deep, sensory conversation with the environment. You don't need to see the world to know it is there. You can feel its heartbeat in the silence. During this midnight awakening, your mind operates on what we might call dream logic. To the medieval person, dreams were not just random firings of neurons. They were visions, warnings, or spiritual journeys. As you sit in the dark, the line between what is real and what is imagined begins to blur. Just imagine believing that as you slept, your soul might actually leave your body to wander the local woods or visit the shrines of saints. When you wake for this midnight interval, you often spend the time recounting your dreams to those sharing your bed. This communal sharing of the subconscious created a shared mythology within the family. You might discuss a dream of a white stag, interpreting it as a sign of coming grace, or a dream of a stormy sea as a warning to be careful with your finances. This wasn't seen as superstition. It was a form of psychological processing. You were checking the weather of your soul. This midnight window allowed you to integrate your inner life with your outer reality in a way that modern humans, rushing from the pillow to the coffee pot, have entirely lost. History books often portray the medieval night as a terrifying time of demons and outlaws. And while there was fear, there was also a unique form of nocturnal socializing. In larger households or monasteries, the midnight hour was a time of communal activity. The monks would rise for matins, their Gregorian chants drifting across the cold stone of the cloisters, a sonic bridge between earth and the divine. In the villages, if the moon was full, neighbours might even visit one another, the moonlight acting as a natural invitation. Can you imagine the hushed conversations held over a shared cup of small ale in the middle of the night? These were the hours for secrets. If you had a grievance with a neighbor or a forbidden romance to cultivate, the watch was your sanctuary. The darkness provided a privacy that was impossible during the sunlit hours when every movement was watched by 100 eyes. The night was the only time you truly belonged to yourself. The feudal system, the church's tithes, and the endless labor of the fields all paused at dusk. In the midnight awakening, you are not a peasant or a lord, you are simply a human being breathing in the dark. Eventually, as the first hint of grey begins to touch the eastern horizon, you feel the second sleep approaching. This sleep is different. It is heavier, more profound, and often filled with the most vivid, lingering dreams. You bank the fire once more, tuck the furs around your chin, and slide back into the depths of unconsciousness. When you finally wake for the day, as the sun crests the hills and the village bells begin their morning rhythm, you don't feel tired. You feel as though you have lived an entire lifetime in the hours of darkness. You have prayed, you have thought, you have dreamed, and you have connected with the silent world. This biphasic rhythm, this two-sleep system, was the heartbeat of human history for millennia, a natural cycle that aligned our biology with the cosmos. Just imagine the richness of a life that gave you 2 mornings every day. Can you see how different your perspective would be if you had a dedicated time for stillness and reflection built into every single night? This is one of the greatest things nobody talks about, that the people of the Middle Ages might have been more rested, more introspective, and more in tune with their own minds than we are today, despite all our modern comforts. As the morning light begins to stream through the shutters, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, you prepare to face the physical labor of the day, but you carry the peace of the watch with you. The shadows have shared their secrets, and you are ready to walk the sunlit world once more, knowing that the night is not an end, but a beautiful, hidden beginning. Now, as the morning mist begins to pull away from the damp earth like a heavy grey curtain, we step out of the cottage and into the landscape of the medieval mind. To the modern eye, a forest is just a collection of trees, and a mountain is merely a geological formation. But for you, walking through the 14th century, the world is a living, breathing manuscript written by the hand of the divine. Every rock, every stream, and every hill is infused with a specific spiritual weight. This is what we might call the geometry of the soul, the way the medieval person mapped their internal spiritual state onto the physical world around them. Just imagine walking out of your door and believing, with every fibre of your being, that you are not just walking through dirt and grass, but through a garden of symbols. Can you imagine the intensity of a world where nothing is just what it seems? To the medieval mind, the physical world was a thin veil, and behind that veil pulsed a hidden reality of angels, demons, and the whispers of saints. This is one of the things nobody talks about, the sheer, vibrant psychological complexity of navigating a landscape that was constantly speaking to you. As you walk toward the village edge, you notice the old oak tree that marks the boundary of the common land. In the modern world, this is a property line. For you, this tree is a witness. You believe that the roots of that oak reach down into the very foundations of the earth, touching the bones of the ancestors, while its branches brush against the hem of heaven. When a contract is signed beneath its shade, the tree itself holds the oath. Can you imagine the sense of accountability that comes from living in a world where nature is a moral observer. If you lie, the very air feels heavier. If you act with charity, the sunlight seems to hit the leaves with a different, more golden clarity. This isn't just poetic fluff. It was a lived, biological reality. The medieval person didn't feel separate from nature. There was no environment out there to be saved or exploited. There was only the creation, and you were a part of its intricate mathematical design. This design was often expressed through sacred numbers and shapes. The village square might be laid out to reflect the 4 cardinal directions, representing the 4 Gospels or the 4 humours of the body. The local well is not just a source of water. Its circular rim represents the perfection of eternity. When you look at the world, you see a series of overlapping circles and squares, a divine geometry that assures you that despite the plague, the taxes, and the cold, there is an underlying order. Everything is exactly where it is supposed to be. Nobody talks about how crowded the medieval world felt. Even when you were standing alone in a vast, silent field, you were never truly alone. The unseen neighbours were always there. Just imagine walking past a dark thicket of briars and instinctively crossing yourself. Not because you're afraid of a wolf, but because you know that spirits of the middle realm dwell there. These weren't necessarily the polished golden angels of Renaissance paintings. They were the hidden people. The fae, the brownies, the spirits of the spring, who were remnants of an older pagan world that the church had smoothed over but never truly erased. To the medieval person, the world was a shared space. You shared your barn with the spirits that protected the grain. You shared the forest with the green man, who ensured the return of the leaves. This created a specific kind of environmental etiquette. You didn't just dump waste into a stream. You apologized to the water. You didn't cut down a hawthorn tree without leaving a small offering of bread or ribbon. It was a world of constant negotiation. Can you imagine the humility required to live in a world where you are not the highest authority? It was a life of asks rather than takes. You asked the earth for its harvest. You asked the forest for its wood, and you asked the spirits for their silence. For a person in the Middle Ages, the concept of a vacation didn't exist, but the pilgrimage did. However, you didn't have to walk to Rome or Jerusalem to be a pilgrim. Life itself was the journey. Every time you left your village to go to a neighbouring market, you were practicing for the great journey of the soul after death. Just imagine having no map in your pocket, no GPS, and no clear idea of what lay 50 miles beyond your home. The world was a mystery that unfolded one step at a time. This created a profound sense of presence. You weren't looking forward to the destination. You were intensely aware of the mud on your boots, the smell of the gorse bushes, and the way the wind changed as you crested a hill. The landscape was a mirror. If the road was rocky and difficult, it was a reflection of the trials your soul must face. If you found a clear bubble in spring, it was a physical manifestation of divine grace. History books often focus on the physical dangers of travel, the bandits and the broken axles, but they miss the spiritual drama. Every mile was a victory. Every new horizon was a revelation. You were traveling through a world that was literally designed to teach you who you were. As the sun begins to climb higher, you look up. To a modern person, the sky is empty space. To you, it is the firmament, a series of crystal spheres that make a music so perfect and so loud that human ears, dulled by sin, can no longer hear it. This was the music of the spheres. Can you imagine the comfort of believing that the stars above you are not cold, dead balls of gas, but the literal floor of heaven? The constellations weren't just navigation tools. They were the clock of the world. You knew that when the Pleiades rose, it was time to sow the winter wheat. You knew that a blood moon wasn't just an eclipse, but a call to prayer. The sky was a giant ticking mechanism that connected your small life to the vastness of eternity. This connection gave the medieval person a sense of cosmic significance. You might be a humble peasant with one pair of shoes and a leaking roof, but you were also a vital part of a universe that sang. When you looked at the stars, you weren't looking at nothingness. You were looking at the architecture of your eternal home. This is the great secret of the medieval mind. They never felt small in the way we do. They were always at the center of a grand, celestial drama. Finally, as you approach the local church, you see the geometry of the soul made manifest in stone. The cathedral or the parish church was the village's anchor. Just imagine a building where every single arch, every gargoyle, and every floor tile was a piece of a puzzle. The builders didn't use blueprints in the way we do. They used proportion. They believed that certain mathematical ratios, like the golden mean, were the language God used to build the universe. By building a church with these ratios, they were literally trapping a piece of heaven on earth. When you walk through the doors, you are supposed to feel a physical shift in your body. The height of the ceiling is designed to pull your spine straight. The narrowness of the aisles is meant to focus your mind. And then there are the grotesques, the strange, twisted faces carved into the high corners. Nobody talks about the humor of the Middle Ages. These carvings weren't just to ward off evil. They were reminders that the world is a strange, messy, and often funny place. They represented the marginalia of life, the things that didn't quite fit into the perfect circles of the divine. They were a recognition that to be human is to be a bit of a monster and a bit of an angel all at once. As the midday bell begins to toll, you realize that your walk through the fields has been a conversation. You have spoken to the trees, you have negotiated with the unseen neighbors, and you have read the map of the sky. This is the hidden reality of the Middle Ages, a world where the mind and the landscape were one. There was no internal world and external world. There was only the great tapestry. Can you imagine the peace that comes from that kind of integration? You are never lost because you are always on the map of the soul. You are never alone because the world is crowded with witnesses. As we pause here, let the geometry of this world settle into your mind. Feel the mathematical perfection of the arches and the wild, chaotic spirit of the forest blending together. In the next part of our journey, we will step into the sensory explosion of the marketplace, where this spiritual order meets the colourful, noisy, and often fragrant reality of medieval commerce. But for now, just breathe in the air of the 14th century. It is thick with meaning, heavy with history, and vibrating with the silent music of a world that knew exactly where it stood in the universe. As the midday sun reaches its zenith, the quiet contemplation of the fields is shattered by a distant, rhythmic roar. It is the sound of 1,000 voices, the clatter of iron-shod wheels on cobblestone, and the sharp, melodic tolling of the market bell. You are approaching the heart of the medieval town, a place where the geometry of the soul meets the raw, pulsing energy of human commerce. Just imagine stepping from the silent green sanctuary of the forest into a kaleidoscope of motion and colour so intense it feels like a physical blow to the chest. This is the marketplace, the internet, the mall, and the town square all rolled into one. History books often describe these places as drab and grey, but can you imagine the sheer brilliance of the colours that surround you? To the medieval eye, colour was a luxury, a statement of life itself. The stalls are draped in awnings of deep madder red, saffron yellow and woad blue. The people passing you are not ghosts in brown rags. They are wearing their finest woolens, dyed with local lichens and roots to produce vibrant greens and earthy purples. This is a world that's starved for visual stimulation, and the market is its feast. Before you even see the goods, the smells of the market reach out to claim you. This is an architecture of scent that nobody talks about. It is not merely the stink of antiquity, it is a complex, layered atmosphere. First, there is the heavy, sweet smell of roasting meat, pork crackling over open pits, seasoned with wild sage and garlic. Then, there is the sharp, acidic tang of the tanneries and the metallic ozone scent of the blacksmith's forge. But as you move deeper into the stalls of the grocers, a term derived from those who sell by the gross, the air changes. Can you imagine the sudden, intoxicating cloud of cinnamon, cloves, and pepper? These spices have travelled thousands of miles on the backs of camels and in the holds of creaking ships. To you, the smell of nutmeg isn't just a kitchen ingredient, it is the scent of the Orient, a fragrant proof of a wider world you will never see. You breathe it in deeply, letting the exotic heat of the spices clear the dampness of the English or French morning from your lungs. It is a sensory bridge to the unknown. Commerce in the Middle Ages was not the impersonal transaction we know today. There are no price tags here. There is only the liturgy of trade. Every purchase is a social performance. Just imagine standing before a cloth merchant. You don't just hand over a coin. You feel the weight of the wool. You discuss the weather that affected the sheep's fleece, and you engage in a ritualistic haggle. This haggling isn't about greed. It's about establishing a just price, a concept that combined economics with morality. If a merchant charges too much, he isn't just a bad businessman. He is endangering his soul. You look him in the eye, searching for honesty. The exchange of a silver penny is a physical bond between two humans. Can you imagine the weight of that coin in your hand? It is cold, thin, and hammered by hand. It feels substantial, a piece of the earth's own marrow, given in exchange for the labour of another man's life. In this market, you aren't a consumer. You are a participant in a sacred cycle of survival. The market has its own music, known as the cries of the town. Merchants do not simply sit and wait. They sing. Each trade has its own lyrical call, a melodic advertisement that has been passed down for generations. Hot peascods, cries one. Fresh herrings, bellows another in a rhythmic, chanting baritone. Can you imagine the layering of these voices? It creates a sonic tapestry that tells you exactly where you are without you having to open your eyes. Woven into this are the sounds of the animals, the lowing of cattle brought in for the fair, the frantic clucking of chickens in wicker crates, and the occasional startling scream of a peacock owned by a local lord. It is a cacophony that reflects the medieval belief in a busy universe. There is no such thing as empty space or empty silence here. To be alive is to be heard. You add your own voice to the mix, greeting a cousin from 3 villages over, or asking the baker about the quality of the new rye. The market is the social nervous system of the kingdom, vibrating with the news of births, deaths, and the distant rumours of wars. As you navigate the crowd, you are constantly reading the people around you. In the Middle Ages, your clothes were your identity card. Just imagine being able to tell a man's exact profession, social status, and even his home region just by the shape of his hood or the material of his belt. This was governed by sumptuary laws, but also by deep-seated tradition. A master carpenter wears a specific leather apron. A scholar wears a long fur-lined gown, even in the heat. A woman of high birth wears sleeves so long they nearly touch the ground, signalling that she does not need to use her hands for manual labour. You see a man in a tunic of vibrant scarlet, the most expensive dye made from the crushed bodies of Kermes insects, and you instinctively give him room. You see a pilgrim with a scallop shell pinned to his hat, and you feel a flash of respect for the miles he has trodden. It is a world of visual shorthand, where everyone knows their place and the places of everyone else. In our world of plastic and digital ghosts, we have lost the feast of the tangible, but here, everything is raw and real. You run your hand over a display of wooden bowls, feeling the smooth, oily finish of the lathe. You touch a stack of parchment, surprised by its skin-like warmth, which makes sense, as it is made of calf skin. You watch a glassblower create a tiny bubbled vial, the heat of the furnace radiating against your face. This is the beauty of the medieval market that nobody talks about, the absolute honesty of the objects. There is no mass production. Every item in this square was made by a human hand, and every item bears the slight, beautiful imperfections of its creator. You buy a small honey cake, still warm from the oven, wrapped in a cabbage leaf. As you bite into it, the sweetness of the local clover honey explodes on your tongue, grounded by the coarse, nutty texture of stone ground flour. It is the taste of the land you walk on. As the afternoon sun begins to slant, casting long dramatic shadows across the stalls, the market bell tolls again. The peak of the day is passing. The frantic energy begins to settle into a weary, satisfied hum. You prepare to leave the noise behind, your bag slightly heavier and your senses overflowing. As you leave the vibrant, chaotic hum of the marketplace, the evening light begins to stretch across the village green. You pass a tethered goat and a group of geese waddling in a perfect, determined line. To the modern mind, these are merely livestock, resources to be managed, or pets to be cherished. But in the medieval world, the creatures that surround you are something much deeper. They are legal entities, spiritual mirrors, and moral neighbours. This is the secret life of animals, a world of profound kinship and bizarre responsibility that history books rarely touch upon. Just imagine walking into the local courthouse, not to see a man stand trial for theft, but to witness a formal legal proceeding against a swarm of locusts or a wayward sow. Can you imagine the solemnity of a courtroom where a pig is brought before a magistrate, accused of a crime, and provided with a defense lawyer? This wasn't a joke or a piece of folklore. It was a deeply serious application of medieval law. To you, living in this era, the world is a single, unified moral fabric. If an animal breaks the peace, it has violated the laws of God and man. and it must be held to account. Nobody talks about the animal trials of the Middle Ages, yet they were a recurring feature of life. If a bull gored a traveller, or if rats infested a granary, the community didn't always react with simple violence. They turned to the law. Can you imagine the scene? The town crier announces the trial. A summons is issued to the vermin of the field, read aloud in the town square. A lawyer is appointed to represent the animals, often arguing that the creatures were merely following their God-given nature, or that they hadn't been given proper notice to leave the premises. This reflects a fascinating belief in the agency of the natural world. You don't look at a horse and see a biological machine. You see a being with a soul, perhaps not an immortal human soul, but an anima, a breath of life that demands respect. When a judge passes sentence on an animal, it is a way of restoring the great chain of being. It is an admission that we all live under the same roof. There is a strange, heavy dignity in this. You live in a world where even the smallest mouse is recognized as a stakeholder in the universe. But the secret life of animals extended far beyond the courtroom and into the very way you thought about the world. You likely own or have seen a bestiary. These weren't biology textbooks, they were spiritual encyclopedias. Just imagine looking at a picture of a lion and being told that the lion breathes life into its cubs 3 days after they are born, a symbol of the resurrection. Or seeing a pelican, which was believed to feed its young with its own blood, symbolizing the sacrifice of the divine. In your mind, every animal is a walking parable. The fox isn't just a predator, he is the embodiment of Reynard, the trickster who exposes the hypocrisy of the powerful. The bee isn't just a honey producer, it is a model of the perfect, industrious Christian society, living in harmony under a single ruler. This means that every time you look at the creatures in your yard, you are reading a living book. The crow on the fence and the ox in the furrow are constant reminders of how you should, or should not, live your life. Can you imagine the richness this adds to a simple walk through the farmyard? You are surrounded by a cast of characters in a cosmic drama. There is also a physical intimacy with animals that the modern world has sanitized. Can you imagine the warmth of a cow's breath against your hand in the pre-dawn cold of the barn? In the winter, you might even bring your most valuable livestock into the lower level of your home. The heat from their massive bodies rises through the floorboards, helping to keep your family from freezing. You know the individual temperament of every sheep in your flock. You know which ox is stubborn and which is steady. This is the kinship of the furrow. You and your animals are partners in a struggle for survival. When the harvest is successful, you give the oxen an extra portion of grain as a reward. When an animal dies, it is not just a financial loss. It is the departure of a companion who has worked beside you in the mud and the rain for years. There is no factory farming here. There is only the long, slow, shared labor of the seasons. You understand that your life depends on theirs, and theirs on yours. It is a symbiotic contract written in sweat and earth. Beyond the fences of the village lies the wilderness, and there the animals take on an even more mysterious quality. Just imagine the stories told by the hearth about the wolves that howl in the forest. You don't see them as mere canines. They are Isengrim, the rivals of the fox, or perhaps even shapeshifters. The stag in the deep woods is a royal messenger, a creature of such grace that to hunt him is a ritualized, almost sacred act. Nobody talks about how the medieval person felt the gaze of the wild. When you enter the forest to gather wood, you feel the eyes of the birds and the small mammals upon you. You are an intruder in their kingdom. This creates a sense of wild law. You don't kill more than you need, not just out of thrift, but out of a fear of upsetting the balance. The animals of the wild are the guardians of the world's secrets, and you treat them with a cautious, superstitious reverence. As the sun finally sets and you head back toward your home, the sounds of the animals change. The daytime birds fall silent, and the night walkers begin their shift. You hear the rustle of a hedgehog in the dry leaves and the distant, lonely bark of a fox. You feel a profound sense of belonging. You are not a master standing above nature, but a member of a vast, noisy, and complicated family. This is the secret life of animals that we have lost, the recognition that we are all fellow creatures. Can you imagine the peace that comes from knowing you are part of a world where even a pig has a day in court, and even a bee is a teacher of virtue? As you bank your fire and prepare for sleep, you listen to the rhythmic breathing of the animals in the stable. It is the heartbeat of the world, steady and ancient, reminding you that you are never truly alone in the dark. As you leave the gentle lowing of the stables behind, you find yourself walking toward the great stone silhouette that dominates the horizon. In the medieval world, the village and the market are places of noise, of negotiation, and of the constant, earthy smells of survival. But standing at the edge of the town is a portal to another dimension. The cathedral. Just imagine a world where most buildings are made of wood, thatch, and wattle and daub, structures that feel temporary and organic. And then, looming over them all, is a mountain of carved stone, reaching toward the clouds with a defiance that borders on the miraculous. This is the architecture of silence, a sensory experience that history books often fail to translate. Today, we live in a world of constant background hum, the whir of fans, the distant roar of traffic, the electronic buzz in our pockets. But in the 14th century, true silence was a rare and powerful commodity, and the cathedral was its greatest reservoir. Can you imagine the physical transition as you push open the heavy oak doors, the hinges groaning with the weight of centuries, and step across the threshold? The moment the door closes behind you, the world vanishes. The frantic shouting of the marketplace is cut off as if by a knife. The air here is different. It is cool, even in the height of summer, and it carries the scent of damp limestone, ancient incense, and the faint, sweet smell of beeswax. But more than the smell, it is the pressure of the silence that hits you. It isn't an empty silence. It is a heavy, velvet stillness that feels as though it has its own mass. Just imagine looking up. Your eyes, used to the low ceilings of a cottage or the open expanse of a field, are pulled upward by the soaring verticality of the Gothic arches. To the medieval mind, this wasn't just clever engineering, it was sacred geometry. The master masons believed that by using specific mathematical proportions, they could harmonize the physical space with the vibrations of the heavens. They were building a musical instrument out of stone, designed to resonate with the human soul. You don't just see the height, you feel it in your chest. Your breathing slows, your heartbeat settles. In this space, the geometry of the soul we spoke of earlier finds its physical home. Nobody talks about the medieval experience of light. In an era without electricity, light was precious and symbolic. Inside the cathedral, you encounter the lux nova, the new light. Can you imagine the shock of the stained glass? We see these windows today and think of them as art, but to you, they are portals. The glass is not perfectly clear. It is thick, bubbled, and uneven, which causes the sunlight to shatter into a million dancing fragments of cobalt blue, ruby red, and emerald green. As the sun moves outside, the interior of the stone forest shifts. A pool of deep, liquid violet falls across your hands. A streak of crimson illuminates a carving of a vine on a distant pillar. This wasn't decoration, it was theology. Light was seen as the most direct manifestation of the divine. By filtering it through the stories of the saints and the prophets, the cathedral was literally bathing you in a heavenly narrative. You aren't just looking at a story, you are standing inside it. The light feels thick, almost as if you could reach out and touch the colours floating in the air. As you walk down the nave, your footsteps echo against the floor, a rhythmic clack-clack that sounds like a heartbeat against the stone. Can you imagine the realization that every single inch of this massive structure was shaped by a human hand? There were no power tools, no hydraulic lifts. Every block of limestone was quarried, hauled by oxen, and carved with a chisel and mallet. You run your hand along a pillar and feel the tiny, repetitive marks of the mason's tool. These are the signatures of the unseen workers. Nobody talks about the anonymity of these creators. They didn't carve their names in the stone for glory, but for God. You feel a profound connection to the labor of the past. The stone feels warm to the touch, as if it has soaked up the prayers and the breaths of the thousands who have stood exactly where you are standing over the last 100 years. The building is a living library of human effort, a physical manifestation of a community's collective hope. While the cathedral is a place of silence, it is also a place of acoustic wonder. Just imagine being present when the choir begins to sing Gregorian chant. These melodies were not designed for the radio. They were designed for this specific stone chamber. The notes don't just travel to your ears. They bounce off the vaulted ceilings and spiral down the long aisles, creating a shimmering web of sound that seems to come from the walls themselves. Because there is no background noise, the human voice takes on a terrifying, beautiful power. A single cough sounds like a thunderclap. A whispered prayer carries for 50 feet. This taught the medieval person the value of the unspoken. You learn to communicate through presence rather than noise. You sit on a cold stone bench and let the silence wash over you, realizing that in this stillness, you can finally hear your own thoughts. It is a form of mental sanctuary that the modern world, with its constant pings and notifications, has almost entirely deleted from the human experience. As you finally prepare to leave, you pause at the door. You look back one last time at the long, dim shadows and the glowing jewels of the windows. You feel reordered. The chaos of the marketplace and the worries of the farm have been put into perspective by the vast, quiet geometry of the stone. Can you imagine stepping back out into the light of the late afternoon? The world feels louder, brighter, and more chaotic than it did 20 minutes ago. But you carry a piece of the silence with you. This is the secret of the medieval cathedral. It wasn't just a place to pray. It was a place to recalibrate the human nervous system. It was the architecture of silence that allowed a person to endure the hardships of a difficult life with a sense of internal peace. As you walk away, the bells begin to ring for vespers, the evening prayers. The sound is different now. It isn't just a signal of time. It is a resonance that reminds you of the stone forest you just left behind. The long shadows of the cathedral now stretch across the village as the sun begins its slow descent. Your body feels the familiar pull of hunger, but in the medieval world, eating is not merely the act of refueling. It is a complex social ritual, a performance of status, and a spiritual exercise. Just imagine walking into a great hall or even a modest cottage at mealtime. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meats, freshly baked bread, and the sharp herbal notes of ale. But before a single morsel touches your lips, there is a choreography of etiquette that would put a modern dinner party to shame. History often paints medieval dining as a scene of greasy-handed barbarians tossing bones to dogs. But the reality was far more refined. For you, the table is a stage where your nurture, your upbringing and character, is on full display. Can you imagine the pressure of knowing that how you hold your knife or how you break your bread tells the world exactly who you are? This is the art of the table, a hidden world of manners and flavors that define the social fabric of the age. The first thing you notice as you sit is the lack of a ceramic plate. Instead, before you lies a trencher. This is a thick, flat slice of 4-day-old unleavened bread carved into a square. It serves as your plate, your sponge, and eventually your charity. Just imagine the texture of it, hard as a board, designed to soak up the rich, fatty juices of the pottage or the roast. Nobody talks about the social life of the trencher. In many households, you don't eat alone. You share your trencher with a companion. This is a moment of profound intimacy and trust. To share a plate with someone is to signal peace and equality. As you use your fingers, carefully, using only the thumb and first 2 fingers as dictated by the manuals of courtesy, you pick pieces of meat from the communal dish and place them on the bread. By the end of the meal, the trencher is saturated with the flavors of the feast. You don't eat it yourself. Instead, it is collected in a basket and given to the alms seekers at the gate. Your meal literally feeds the hungry. As you taste the food, you are hit by a flavor profile that is entirely alien to the modern palate. We think of medieval food as bland, but for those who could afford it, it was a riot of seasoning. Can you imagine a savory meat pie that tastes of sugar, cinnamon, and cloves? Or a fish dish colored a brilliant sunshine yellow with saffron? Spices were the ultimate status symbol, but they were also seen as medicine. Based on the theory of the 4 humours, the cook was essentially a pharmacist. If you had a cold temperament, you were served hot spices like pepper and ginger to balance your internal heat. Every meal was a balancing act. Nobody talks about the Galenic science behind a medieval menu. You aren't just eating for pleasure. You are eating to keep your soul in harmony with your body. The sharp tang of verjuice, a liquid made from unripened grapes, cuts through the richness of the fat, a culinary tradition designed to aid digestion and please the spirit. Because you are eating largely with your hands, the ritual of washing is paramount. Just imagine a servant approaching you with a silver basin and a ewer of water scented with rose petals or rosemary. You wash your hands publicly before the meal begins and again after it ends. This isn't just about hygiene, it's a ceremonial cleansing. To have clean hands at the table was a metaphor for having a clean soul. There are strict rules. You must never blow on your food to cool it. You must never dip your meat directly into the salt cellar. Instead, you use your knife to place a small pile of salt on your trencher, and you must never pick your teeth with your knife. Can you imagine the quiet, focused intensity of the room? There is music playing, perhaps a lute or a recorder, but the conversation is hushed and respectful. The table is a place of refining. Even a peasant in a hut follows a simplified version of these rules, showing respect for the bread that keeps them alive. Where you sit at the table tells the story of your life. At the center of the high table sits a massive ornate vessel, the Great Salt. Just imagine the social anxiety of sitting below the salt. If you are placed far down the table, away from the expensive spices and the fine white bread, you know exactly where you stand in the eyes of the Lord. The bread itself is a map of class. The lords eat manché, fine, bolted white bread made from the heart of the wheat. The servants eat brown bread, or maslin, a mix of rye and wheat. The very poor eat bread made from ground peas or beans. Every bite you take reinforces your identity. But despite this hierarchy, there is a sense of unity. Everyone is eating from the same kitchen, breathing the same steam, and participating in the same ancient human act of breaking bread. Water is rarely drunk at the table, not because it is poisonous, as the myths suggest. Medieval people knew a clean spring when they saw one, but because ale and wine are nutritive. Can you imagine a world where ale is consumed at every meal, even breakfast? This isn't the heavy alcoholic beer of today. It is small ale, a thick, cloudy, fermented grain drink that provides the bulk of your daily calories. It is, quite literally, liquid bread. Wine, if you are lucky enough to have it, is often piment. Wine sweetened with honey and infused with spices until it tastes like a liquid jewel. It is served in communal mazes, wooden bowls with silver rims. As the cup passes from person to person, you feel the social glue of the community. To refuse the cup is an insult. To drink deeply is a gesture of brotherhood. As the meal concludes and the trenchers are cleared away, a final voidé is served. A small snack of spiced wine and comfits, sugar-coated seeds, to settle the stomach. You stand and offer a prayer of thanks. Can you imagine the feeling of fullness that goes beyond the stomach? You have participated in a ritual that connects you to your neighbors, your status, and your God. Nobody talks about the art of the table because it was so fundamental to life that it was invisible. But it was here, in the shared pottage and the communal cup, that the Middle Ages truly lived. As you leave the table and the servants begin to take down the trestles to clear the hall for sleep, the flavours of cinnamon and wood smoke linger on your tongue. A sensory memory of a world that understood that to eat is to be human. As the morning sun begins to burn through the silver dew of the meadow, you walk toward the edge of the village, carrying a small willow basket. In the modern world, if your head throbbed or your stomach churned, you would reach for a plastic bottle of synthetic pills. But in the medieval world, you reach for the earth. Just imagine a life where every weed, every flower, and every bit of bark is a potential miracle. To you, the landscape isn't just a view, it is a living medicine cabinet. This is the pharmacy of the hedgerow, a sophisticated system of healing that history books often dismiss as mere superstition, but which was actually a deep, ancestral dialogue with the natural world. Can you imagine the sheer breadth of knowledge required to survive? You aren't a doctor, yet you know exactly which leaf stops a bleed and which root brings a heavy, dreamless sleep. This knowledge wasn't found in books. For most, it was passed down through the leechcraft of mothers and the whispered wisdom of the village wise woman. You look at a patch of stinging nettles and you don't see a nuisance. You see a cure for the joints and a spring tonic for the blood. This is a world where humanity and botany are inextricably linked. As you kneel by a damp stone wall, you find a cluster of lungwort, its leaves spotted with pale flecks. You harvest it carefully. To your mind, the universe is a series of clues left by the divine. This is the doctrine of signatures. Just imagine believing that God gave every plant a physical sign to show humans what it could heal. Because lungwort looks like a diseased lung, it must be the cure for the cough. Because the yellow juice of the celandine looks like bile, it is meant for the liver. Nobody talks about the beautiful, poetic logic of this system. It turned the act of foraging into a scavenger hunt for mercy. You look at the walnut, with its hard outer shell like a skull and its convoluted nut like a brain, and you know it is the remedy for a headache. This isn't just guesswork. It is a way of seeing the world as a coherent, caring whole. It gave the medieval person a profound sense of belonging. The earth was not a random accident. It was a pharmacy specifically designed for your survival. But your herbalism is guided by more than just shapes. It is guided by the 4 humours. You believe that your health depends on the balance of 4 vital fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Can you imagine viewing your body as a garden that can be damp, dry, hot, or cold? If you are suffering from a cold fever, you seek out hot herbs like mustard or ginger to restore the balance. If you are feeling melancholy, literally black bilish, you look for borage, which was said to bring joy to the heart and drive away the darkness. This is the hidden science of the Middle Ages. You don't just treat a symptom, you treat the person. You are looking to restore the internal climate of your soul. When you drink a tea made of willow bark, rich in salicin, the ancestor of modern aspirin, you feel the cooling effect on your blood. You are a part of the seasonal rhythm, and your medicine changes as the year turns. The hedgerow was the boundary between the tamed world and the wild, and it was the most fertile ground for the healer. Just imagine the variety of life in a single mile of medieval hedge. You find yarrow, the soldier's woundwort. You know that if a blade nicks your hand, you can chew these feathery leaves into a pulp and press them against the cut to stop the flow of blood instantly. You find St. John's wort, which you hang over your door to ward off the nightmare and the spirits of the air, but you also crush it into oil to heal burns. Nobody talks about the multitasking nature of medieval plants. Lavender wasn't just for scent. It was a potent antiseptic and a sedative. Rosemary wasn't just for roasting. It was for remembrance, used to clear the mind and sharpen the wit. As you fill your basket, you are participating in an ancient, silent economy. You aren't buying health, you are gathering it. This created a sense of independence and resilience. Even in the poorest hovel, the knowledge of the hedgerow provided a measure of control over the fragility of life. If your village remedies fail, you might travel to the local monastery, where the physic garden represents the height of medieval botanical science. Can you imagine walking through a perfectly ordered grid of raised beds, each containing a single species of plant? This is the ancestor of the modern research lab. The monks are the keepers of the written tradition, translating ancient Greek and Roman texts into practical cures. Here, you might find exotic plants brought by pilgrims from the Holy Land. Poppies for pain, mandrake for surgery, and roses for the eyes. The air in the monastery garden is a thick, intoxicating perfume. The monks treat healing as a sacred duty, believing that to mend the body is to prepare the soul for God. They keep herbals, vast hand-painted books that detail the virtues of every plant. You watch them distill essential oils in glass retorts, the sunlight catching the steam. It is a world of quiet, focused observation, a bridge between the wild wisdom of the woods and the structured science of the future. As you walk back to your cottage with your basket of green treasures, the sun begins to set. You prepare a poultice by bruising herbs with a stone, the sharp, clean scent of crushed mint and vervain filling the room. Can you imagine the comfort of that smell? In a world of often brutal physical reality, the fragrance of herbs was the smell of hope. This is the pharmacy that nobody talks about, the one that required no money, only eyes to see and a memory to hold the stories of the plants. It was a system that treated the human being as a vital part of the natural world, rather than a master standing above it. As you brew a pot of chamomile and valerian to ease your family into the first sleep, you feel the ancient peace of the earth. You are cared for. The medicine is at your feet, waiting in the shadows of the hedgerow, as it has been for 1,000 years. As you step back into the village lane, the evening light catches the texture of your neighbour's cloak. In the modern world, clothes are often a matter of whim, a cheap reflection of a passing trend. But in the medieval world, your clothing is your second skin, a social contract, and a silent biography. Just imagine a world where it is illegal to wear a certain colour or a specific type of fur because your grandfather wasn't a knight. Can you imagine the weight of a society where you could be fined or imprisoned simply for dressing above your station? This is the language of fashion, a complex code of fabrics and threads that dictated every interaction in the town square. Nobody talks about the intense, almost spiritual labour that went into every single stitch. Today, we buy shirts for the price of a sandwich and discard them when a button falls off. But for you, a tunic is a treasure. It represents months of human effort, from the shearing of the sheep to the spinning of the wool, the fermentation of the dye, and the slow, rhythmic piercing of the needle. When you put on your clothes, you are literally wearing the time and labour of your community. As you walk, you pass a man in a vibrant, deep purple doublet. In the 14th century, this isn't just a fashion choice, it's a legal statement. Just imagine a world governed by sumptuary laws. These were rules designed to keep the social hierarchy visible. If you are a merchant, you might be forbidden from wearing silk, even if you are wealthier than the local baron. Gold embroidery might be reserved only for the blood of kings. These laws existed because the medieval mind hated ambiguity. They wanted to know exactly who they were talking to at a single glance. If a peasant wore a liripipe, the long dangling tail of a hood, that was too long, He was seen as a threat to the natural order. Fashion was the uniform of the soul. By regulating what you wore, the authorities were regulating how you felt and how others perceived you. It was a world where a misplaced piece of lace could be seen as an act of rebellion. Medieval clothing was not just about status. It was about the geometry of the body. Unlike modern clothes that are cut to fit the human form exactly, medieval garments were often made of simple, geometric shapes, rectangles, triangles, and circles to minimize wasted fabric. Can you imagine the ingenuity of the gauze and gussets, the small triangular inserts that allowed a stiff wool tunic to flare out and provide movement? Every piece of clothing was designed for longevity. You don't have a closet full of options. Most people own 2 sets of clothes, one for work and one for holy days. This created a profound physical relationship with your garments. Your tunic knows the shape of your shoulders. It has been patched and mended until it is a mosaic of your life's history. There is a memory in the fabric. When you pull on your heavy wool hood, you feel the familiar weight that has shielded you from a decade of winters. It isn't just a garment, it is an old friend. Nobody talks about the sensory reality of medieval dyes. To get that deep, earthy green, you didn't just mix a chemical. You used weld for yellow and woad for blue. Just imagine the dyer's quarter of a town, a place that smelled of ammonia and fermented plants. Woad, the source of the most common blue, had to be fermented in human urine, an odour so pungent that Queen Elizabeth I would later ban the processing of woad within 5 miles of her palaces. Despite the smell, the colours were breathtaking. To the medieval person, colour was a sign of health and vitality. A dull person wore undyed wool, the colour of the sheep, known as russet. But if you had even a little bit of coin, you sought out the life of colour. You wanted the kermes red, made from the crushed bodies of tiny insects, or the saffron yellow, from the stamens of thousands of crocuses. These colours weren't just pretty, they were the concentrated essence of the natural world, captured and fixed into the fibres of your life. Because buttons were a relatively new and expensive technology for much of the era, your clothes are held together by points, small leather or silk laces tipped with metal aglets. Can you imagine the ritual of dressing in the morning? You don't zip up, you lace. You tie your hose to your doublet with dozens of tiny bows. This created a specific, upright posture. You couldn't just slouch. Your clothes held you in a state of readiness. This lacing also provided a secret language of intimacy. To unlace was a gesture of profound trust. Nobody talks about the clinking sound of a medieval crowd, the hundreds of metal aglets hitting each other as people walked, creating a subtle, metallic music that accompanied the rhythm of the day. Fashion was a tactile and auditory experience, as much as a visual one. As the sun sets and you unlace your heavy outer tunic, you feel the lightness of your linen chemise against your skin. This linen, made from the flax plant, was the most important garment you owned. It was the barrier between your body and the coarse wool. It absorbed your sweat, and it was the only thing you washed frequently. Can you imagine the pride of a woman who has spun the thread for her family's linen? The distaff and the spindle were the symbols of womanhood. From the highest queen to the lowest servant, the whir of the spindle was the background noise of life. Every thread was a prayer. Every weave was a testament to patience. This is the heart of medieval fashion that we have lost. The understanding that we are clothed in the labor of our loved ones. As you lay your clothes carefully over a wooden chest, you realize that you aren't just undressing, you are putting away a social identity. In the darkness of the first sleep, the colors and the laws don't matter. But when the bell rings at dawn, you will lace yourself back into the world, a vibrant thread in the great, colourful tapestry of the Middle Ages. Now, the pilgrimage of the mind. As you lace your boots in the dim light of a new dawn, a restlessness stirs in your spirit. In the modern world, we travel to escape our lives, jumping across continents in metal tubes, disconnected from the land beneath us. But in the medieval world, you are a viator, a traveller by definition. Even if you never venture more than 20 miles from the spire of your village church, your entire life is viewed as a pilgrimage of the mind. Just imagine a world where the act of walking is a form of prayer, and every milestone is a victory over the vast, untamed mystery of the earth. This is the hidden reality of medieval movement that nobody talks about. The road was the only place where the rigid structures of feudal life truly dissolved. On the road, you aren't just a peasant or a smith. You are a seeker. Can you imagine the electric thrill of leaving your field behind, knowing that for the next few weeks, your only duty is to put one foot in front of the other toward a holy destination? The decision to go on a pilgrimage was the medieval equivalent of a life-changing expedition. Whether you were heading to a local shrine of a martyred saint or the legendary gates of Santiago de Compostela, the ritual began before you even left. You receive a formal blessing from the priest. You don some specific gear, a sturdy staff called a border, and a leather scrip, or pouch. Just imagine the weight of that staff in your hand. It isn't just a walking stick. It is a symbol of your spiritual intent. History books often focus on the Crusades, but the real movement of the Middle Ages was this constant, slow-motion migration of common people. You walk because you have a vow to fulfill, a sickness to heal, or a sin to wash away. But deep down, you walk because the road is where the stories are. Nobody talks about the social melting pot of the medieval highway. Can you imagine sharing a campfire with a knight who has seen the walls of Jerusalem, a wandering minstrel with a lute slung over his back, and a merchant carrying silks from the east? On the road, the strict language of fashion we discussed earlier softens. The dust of the path covers everyone equally. This was the only time in your life you might hold a conversation with someone from a different world. You listen to their dialects, strange and musical, and you realize for the first time that your village is just one small stitch in a massive, colourful tapestry. The road is a place of liminality, a threshold where the old rules don't quite apply. You might find yourself dancing at a roadside tavern or sharing a loaf of bread with a beggar, feeling a sense of human connection that the high walls of the manor house usually prevent. We often pity the medieval person for not having accurate maps, but can you imagine the wonder of a world that is mapped by meaning rather than measurement? Your map is a series of stories. You know that 3 days' walk to the west is a spring that cured a blind man. You know that past the great oak is a monastery famous for its ale and its hospitality. This is the cartography of faith. The world isn't a grid of latitude and longitude. It is a landscape of sacred hotspots. When you reach a hilltop and see the sun glinting off the reliquary of a distant cathedral, your heart leaps. That glimmer of gold isn't just a building, it is a destination for your soul. Every step you take in the mud is a step closer to the divine. This turned the physical hardship of travel, the blisters, the rain, the cold nights in haylofts, into a form of penance. The pain was proof that your journey mattered. Of course, nobody talks about the sheer looming silence of the medieval wilderness. Between the towns lay vast stretches of no man's land. Just imagine the feeling of the sun setting while you are still miles from the nearest monastery. The forest at night wasn't just dark, it was a psychological abyss. You fear the outlaws, those who have been cast out of the social nervous system, but you also fear the wild itself. In this era, the forest was seen as a place of testing. It was where saints went to wrestle with demons and where knights went to find their destiny. When you hear a branch snap in the darkness, your mind doesn't go to a squirrel. It goes to the wasteland, the unordered parts of the world where the logic of the village fails. This fear made the sight of a distant tavern light feel like a miracle. The hospitality of the road was a sacred law. To turn away a traveller was to turn away a guest of God. Eventually, your pilgrimage ends and you return to your village, but you are not the same person who left. You wear a pilgrim's badge, a small lead or pewter token pinned to your hat, perhaps a scallop shell or a tiny image of a saint. Can you imagine the status this gives you for the rest of your life? When you sit by the winter fire, you will be the one who saw the world. You bring back stories of stone bridges so long they seem to touch the horizon, of cathedrals that glowed like jewels, and of the sheer, breathtaking scale of the human family. This is the pilgrimage of the mind that nobody talks about. The way travel expanded the medieval soul, without the need for a passport or a plane ticket. As you settle back into the rhythm of the rising and setting sun, the dust of the road stays in your memories. You realize that while your body is back in the field, your spirit is still a traveler, forever walking that thin, winding line between the earth and the sky. The sun has finally dipped beneath the jagged line of the horizon, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and cooling gold. You return once more to the sanctuary of your home. The cycle of the day, the midnight waking, the vibrant market, the sacred silence of the cathedral, and the long road of the pilgrim now pulls toward its natural conclusion. In the modern world, we fight the end of the day with glaring LED lights, pushing back the shadows as if they were an enemy. But for you, in the deep heart of the medieval world, the coming darkness is a friend. It is the time of the final glow, the hour when the physical world retreats and the hearth becomes the center of the universe. Just imagine the quiet settling over your cottage. The animals are still, their rhythmic breathing a soft percussion behind the walls. You sit by the fire, watching the way the flames lick at the dry oak logs. This fire is more than heat. It is a living entity you have tended since dawn. Can you imagine the profound intimacy of a life where your warmth and your light are the direct results of your own steady hands? There is no unseen power here, only the wood you gathered, the flint you struck, and the breath you used to coax the first spark into a flame. Nobody talks about the social geography of the medieval fireside. In the absence of books and screens, The hearth was the village's library, the family's theatre, and the soul's mirror. Just imagine the faces of your family illuminated from below by the orange glow. This is the hour of the old stories. You don't read history, you hear it. You listen to the elders speak of the great frost of 40 years ago, or the legends of saints who walked these very woods. This oral tradition created a memory that was communal and indestructible. As you listen, you feel the threads of your life weaving back into the past. You aren't just an individual. You are a continuation of a story that began long before the stones of the cathedral were laid. The firelight softens the edges of the room, making the simple wooden bowls and the rough-hewn table look like treasures. In this final glow, the hardships of the day, the aching back, the heavy taxes, the cold rain, fade into insignificance. You are warm, you are fed, and you are together. Suddenly, from across the fields, the deep bronze note of the village bell rings out. It is the couvre-feu, the curfew. This is the command to cover the fire. Can you imagine the psychological weight of that sound? It is the official end of the public day. You take a ceramic or metal cover, the curfew bell, and place it over the glowing embers. You don't extinguish the fire, you protect it, ensuring that the coals will remain hot enough to birth a new flame at dawn. This act is a metaphor for the medieval soul. You are banking your energy, turning your gaze inward. The world outside is now the territory of the watchmen and the angels. Inside, you move in a slow, practiced grace, preparing the beds. You lay down the fresh straw, the scent of dried summer grass rising to meet you. There is no blue light to trick your brain into wakefulness. Your body is perfectly synchronized with the cooling earth. You feel the heavy, honest exhaustion that only comes from a day of physical labor and spiritual engagement. As you lie down for your first sleep, let your mind wander over the journey we have taken together. We have explored the things nobody talks about, the 2-act sleep, the legal rights of animals, the secret pharmacy of the weeds, and the sacred geometry of the air itself. Just imagine if we could carry a sliver of this world back into our own. The Middle Ages were not a dark age. They were an age of intense sensory and spiritual presence. They understood that nothing is ordinary. Every piece of bread, every stitch of wool, and every drop of water was a miracle that required effort and gratitude. They lived in a world where the invisible was as real as the visible, and where the rhythm of the heart was tied to the rhythm of the stars. Can you imagine the peace of mind that comes from such a deep, unshakable connection to the universe? The fire is now just a faint, pulsing red eye beneath the curfew cover. The room is dark, save for the silver sliver of moonlight filtering through the shutters. You feel the weight of the centuries pressing softly against you, like a warm quilt. You are part of a long, unbroken line of humans who have stared at these same stars and felt these same quiet mysteries. The unseen Middle Ages are not gone. They are simply waiting in the quiet spaces of our own lives. In the smell of a wood fire, the silence of an old stone building, or the feeling of a heavy wool blanket on a cold night. As you drift into the shadows, let the noise of the modern world finally vanish. You are safe. You are home. Good night.